Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, I've been playing the living hell out of Diablo 4's PTR for Season 4 to try and just really get into the nitty-gritty and experience all the different things that it has to offer, and just generally get a real feeling for how the game will feel properly if all of these changes go through in their current state. Obviously, all these things are subject to various kinds of changes, but for the most part, a lot of the base concepts at least will just be coming into Season 4 at this stage, unless the community is vehemently against them, which I haven't seen really anything happening with any of the new things, at least not from a majority of the players. That said, one of the biggest changes being made all around systematically is to the endgame boss ladder and how it functions on a number of different levels. The way that these summoning materials drop and where they come from has shifted pretty dramatically. The bosses have all gained a higher challenge level version you can choose to do with better rewards. There's a new boss just as a whole within the system, and on top of all that, there's the main thing that this system leads to for most people, which is uber uniques and pursuing them actively by farming the biggest bosses on this ladder. And we'll also be talking about the new one that has been added to the game with Season 4 and showing you what the fight is like. But probably the biggest thing that I want to say right from the get-go is that the boss summoning materials drop significantly more plentifully than they used to. On top of just dropping at higher rates from the old ways of getting them that there were, every base boss summon material, meaning the ones for any boss outside of Duriel and Andariel, can be dropped by pure RNG from any elite enemy in the game. So while this won't happen every time that you kill one, it means no matter what activity you are doing, you will have some method of farming materials for every boss in the game at the same time, rather than just locking you into only spawning one at a time. On top of that, there are new interesting overlaps, such as Helltide, now both spawning the grotesque deader enemies, which drop Varshan summoning materials, and the larger enemies in Helltide, such as Hellborn or the Hellmaiden, having relatively high drop chance for Exquisite Blood, which is the summoning material for Lord Zir. As well, there is a much more direct overlap with Whispers of the Dead and Helltide now, which lets you farm those two together much more actively, and that will of course give you an abundance of the materials for the two bosses that then drop materials for duriel. And the result of that is just way more duriel materials for everyone across the game, which means more farming opportunities for Uber Uniques, and as a whole, that will result in just more Uber Uniques existing in the community each season. Combine that with things like in Nightmare Dungeons, there is a chance for a room to just be absolutely filled with treasure goblins, and if this happens and you kill them all, they drop different boss summon materials, loads them, which just loads you up for doing pure Nightmare Dungeons as well. Essentially, no matter what activity you want to interact with in the endgame in Season 4 and beyond, you will get boss summoning materials, and you'll at least have a small chance of getting the materials for any boss, not just the one related to the active activity. And that's pretty special as far as letting us actually fight the enemies more frequently, which is of course a major complaint a lot of people had. With that covered, then let's talk about the next major change for the system, which is the level 200 bosses. There is a new material in the game that comes from reasonably higher tiers of the new pit activity, which is like a revamped and changed Abattoir of Zir, and for 3 of those materials, you can summon an extra powerful version of any boss ladder boss at level 200. This costs also 5 times the regular amount of boss summoning materials for that creature as well, but the boss is quite difficult compared to even, say, the regular level 100 duriel, so be prepared for that if you do stick your materials into it, and you obviously can't get them back if you can't kill it. That said, let's talk about what the actual experience is like, the rewards, and if it's worth it. Well, to start, I do want to say these level 200 bosses are no joke. They are pretty much one of the tippiest top-tier endgame activities there is, and so you shouldn't expect to be doing them within the first couple of days or even the first couple of weeks of a season, unless you really go hard on game time and farming during that time. The only reason that we have gotten through them so fast in the PTR is both that there are various ways to expedite character power growth ridiculously that there won't be on live servers, but also, personally, I'm playing Dust Devil Barbarian. Dust Devils are guaranteed getting nerfed before hitting live servers, simple as that. That said, the experience is surprisingly good at what it sets out to be. Even in a pretty damn busted build, the fight isn't over in half a second. I am now defensively strong enough to stand in about 80% of the things that level 200 Grégoire does, for example, but not all of them. And Lord Zir, I only kill at level 200 1 out of every few attempts, because the main thing is, there is a debuff that applies to you with these enhanced versions of the bosses that increases the damage that you take over time while you're in the fight. If your damage is not fast enough to kill these enemies quickly, they will simply do more ramping damage as time goes on, which means even if your defenses are strong enough to survive them in the first minute, they may not be if you make it to 3 minutes, 4 minutes even. And in itself, that does a lot to actually bar these off from a lot of people that wouldn't be quite ready to actually take them on, or at least deserve the potential rewards they could have. And it's worth noting that I'm on a pretty decently well-built bard. I'm far from perfect, but I'm well-built, and in prior seasons against the previous hardest content, being at this level of built as a barbarian would just make everything fall over. So it says a lot that it's doing this to me still, and it makes it an enjoyable experience for sure. But then we do have to talk about the rewards for doing this, for how much more difficult it is, bosses, and the extra cost of doing it. And this is where things get a little bit odd in my opinion, but again, this is a PTR, so the boss ladder is effectively split into 3 categories, right? The Uber bosses, Duriel and Andariel, both of these share the same drop table of regular uniques, but also have a much higher than average chance of dropping Uber uniques than anything else in the game. Then we have Gregoire and Varshan. These two drop the materials to summon Duriel. Then there is Zir and Beast and Ice, who together drop the materials to summon Andariel. Currently in the PTR, Beast and Ice only drops Andariel materials from his advanced version, his tormented version, but he also does have the only tormented boss version that is level 150 instead of 200 for some reason. I do hope that changes, but that's how the general system works right now. If you spawn any of the non-Uber bosses as a tormented version, which is the term for the level 200 super versions, then currently you're sort of wasting materials. They drop a fair amount of gear, yes, but they don't drop necessarily 5 times the amount of gear. They drop the summons for an Uber boss, but they only drop 1 of the summoning mats even if you do the higher version, even though this boss costs 5 times the normal amount to spawn in that the normal version does, which is crazy bad return for the materials that you use to create them. My main request from the developers then is if they want to add this system and they want it to be actually used outside of the Uber bosses only, you gotta make these rewards, say, maybe 6 of the Uber boss summon materials if you kill a tormented ladder boss, just that slight little bit that tips it in favor of being efficient to actually farm these harder bosses for the players who are able to, because it's just never ideal to incentivize people to do content that is below their ability or their build's ability. It just breeds boredom extremely easily, so I think that this should be changed a bit. Because currently, the only reason to do a tormented version of a boss is for their rarer drops, their lower drop chances. Every boss ladder boss does have cosmetics of various kinds that they can drop, and I have had these drop far more frequently when fighting the level 200 bosses than just 5 times the normal rate. The extra thing of note here is that in theory, this should also apply to Uber uniques for the bosses that do have them in their loot table. Keep in mind that anytime an Uber spawns from regular Duriel on live servers, it is always one of 2 uniques. You can't just have it drop by itself, it is always the second unique. Duriel is guaranteed to drop 1, but then he has a chance at a second, and the second is what can be an Uber. By the same logic of the cosmetics dropping at a high rate because they are rare drops, these should be similarly regular low drop chance rolls within his loot table, and so the real advantage of tormented bosses seems to be less about the quantity of drops than the rarity of the drops from the boss's actual predefined pool. And so to put that simply, while tormented level 200 super bosses aren't really worth doing for anything else, they will likely be worth it for specifically Duriel and Andariel if you are strong enough to kill them and you want Uber uniques. Also worth noting, the first time that you beat any of these level 200 bosses each season, you do get 1 Resplendent Spark. That doesn't mean 1 per each one that you beat at level 200, just the first time you beat a level 200 boss, and that is 1/4 of the cost of a self-chosen Uber unique as well. And the important part of that is as it becomes easier to get Uber uniques in general, it will get easier to target craft specific ones through this system, the Resplendent Sparks. Eventually, instead of viewing these items as being extremely rare, unlikely for the average player to even get one of, they will at some point become a reasonable thing to think about as far as your actual build for most people. And while it will definitely be a longer term goal in the season, I think we're getting close to the point where it's not really unreasonable to say someone who plays the game a decent amount, not an insane amount, but more than just a few hours a week, I guess, will be able to get any Uber unique that they want probably in a month and a half at most into the season. And that is definitely more along the lines I think Uber unique should be in a seasonal system, at least. On which note, let's talk a bit more about Andariel. The first time that I fought it, I slightly underestimated my power level compared to it, and it turned into literal dust floating around in my tornadoes very quickly. So I farmed up the materials again, and just sort of let it do its attacks for a bit so you can actually see it. It's not the most intricate fight, it's not the deepest one. The majority of the actual mechanics seem to happen at health breakpoints, as they only actually started when I started damaging the boss, but for the most part, it is a pretty tame fight, it seems. Definitely unique compared to the others, it has its moments, and more variety is quite nice at the very least. Then finally, let's just talk about the new Uber unique added in with this too, Tyrael's Might, a chest piece. I've only found footage of this from 1 person who has had it drop so far, so I apologize for the frames on this because it's just really choppy as hell, unfortunately, but again, the only footage I can find. You can see from it, though, the little holy projectiles firing out on every attack in a sort of circle around the actual effect when the player is at full health, and it seems to essentially just be a version of the artillery shrine effect, but attached to an item, staying permanently permanently active while you are healthy. As well, we get to see the actual affixes on the item too, which seems to be bonus resistances, which is pretty good, bonus to maximum all element resist, which is actually massive for the harder content that we have on the PTR, as elemental attacks are the vast majority of the incoming damage in this game. Some damage reduction as well, and then also just all stats, which is just a really strong combination of 4 affixes, great for a chest piece, and the actual effect that it has too is mostly damage based, which is interesting for a chest slot too. As far as the actual concept then, this is really genuinely quite good, as long as the numbers they put on it turn out correct. Most, if not all builds in the game have tons of health regen built in purposefully. A lot of them build around barriers as well, which protects your health at maximum, and both of these things will have you be maximum health the vast majority of the time as a result, which means every attack that you do will shoot out a barrage of holy energy when you're in that state. That means the usability itself of the effect is very high. The functionality makes sense within the game, and at the very least the meta builds, and the affixes on the item are above average at maximum resist is just not a common thing to find literally anywhere in the game on gear. The extra damage resistance that gives you is incredibly staggering, honestly, and we actually have reason to make ourselves tankier because of the new content being added with Season 4. So essentially this all boils down to the numbers they decide to actually give to the damage effect to decide if it's balanced. It has great affixes, a great concept, and all that's left is that little bit of specificity. And that just about does it for today then, everyone. Really just a general talk about the way that both the boss ladder system and the resulting uber uniques it is heavily attached to are shaping up for Season 4, at least from what we have around in the PTR currently. To sum everything up then, there is a bunch of new ways to get the boss summoning materials that makes it far less of a chore, and you can spread shot farm multiple bosses' materials at the same time, which just makes it far more efficient. This lets you fight the uber bosses more and results in more frequent uber uniques dropping for everyone, really. As well, we have the torment challenge level bosses with their increased rewards, but it does seem like these, unless they have some changes, are only going to be worth it for Duriel and Andariel specifically, who will give out uber uniques at a higher rate when fought in this way. All in all, leading to the uber uniques just being far more plentiful among the community as a whole, which is quite neat to see. What are your thoughts on all this then? Do you think this is a shift in a good direction, or do you prefer it when the uber uniques are something that you can see extremely infrequently, something that are very rare to see even among the community as a whole? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.